Alrighty. Should show on your side if it's recording. Yeah.
I mean, I trust you if it says that it is.
Oh, it says recording. It says recording. It should, yeah.
Okay. Yeah, I'm a horrible millennial, so yeah.
What are you an early millennial? How?
I guess I'm technically early. I was born in '85.
Oh, okay. Okay.
But the thing is, my brother and sister are 10 and 15 years older, and then my parents are baby boomers.
Wow.
Yeah. So I'm just grumpy all the time. You know what I'm saying?
I got the opposite. Well, I got my siblings are children. So my closest sibling is 17.
Okay.
He's a junior in high school. So.
Oh wow. All right. And if I read it correctly, you're originally from Ivory Coast?
I was born here in the States, and but my entire family is from there.
Okay, so family's from there, but you were born here. All right, I got you. And you're from Atlanta?
Yeah. I grew up in Atlanta.
Where'd you go to high school?
I went to high school in Parkview. I went to that was in Gwinnett County, but because my dad, the neighborhood that we were in, I was in DeKalb before. Like it started getting real crazy. So he was just like, look, I want you to have opportunity to go to college. I want you to get, all this other stuff. So, he saved up his money and then, bought a house out in Gwinnett. So then we moved out there. But I went to Henderson Middle.
Okay. I went to Southwest DeKalb for high school.
Southwest DeKalb, okay.
Yeah. So I grew up in the Wesley Chapel Bourne Road area. So that's home. But familiar with Parkview, obviously familiar with the Atlanta area.
I went in the 90s and early 2000s, and it was a theme school for like communication and technology, which is interesting.
That early?
Yeah, right. It was like one of the first ones in the state that did that. So it's actually really influential to my practice, really, when I think back on it, because the way in which creativity and technology have kind of been integrated into just the way in which I think. Like technology seems to be just a kind of extension, I feel like, of my like creative arm in a way and creative gestures. So I think because I got that kind of ingrained in me at a young age, it just stuck. So like, just
so clear, like when you say technology got incorporated, because the pieces that I've seen from you were with the Muffled Sound Underwater show.
Yeah.
And so I wasn't able to physically be there. So I live in North Carolina now, but Amanda and everybody will attest. I'm traveling whenever I can.
Yeah.
So I planned on seeing the show at some point, but I remember you basically had a few of the figures, and if I recall, they're resin.
The ones in the show were there's glitter, like acrylic paint, thermoplastic adhesive, and on other figures that I've done before that are kind of look similar, when they get a bit more involved, the process gets more involved, where it's part of a larger installation, I start to get into using like black resin and that sort of projects I've done before. I've used 3D printers, and I got my body 3D scanned, and then had a replica of myself made, and then I made these plaster cast replicas, like copies of the original 3D print.
Okay.
Yeah, there's always integrate. I mean, I've used laser cutters, laser etching, all this other stuff. When I went to undergrad, initially I went for architecture, and then I switched to new media arts and got the minor in architecture. And in the new media arts program, it was very much so geared towards teaching us technology, but as if you're in a BFA program. It was a BA, but it's like taking painting, but then also taking podcasting, podcasting.
So y'all are covering like all media pretty much.
Right. So it's like sculpture class, but then also you're taking writing for game designer or video editing and directing, and all those classes are taught in a way to use them to make art.
So what was it that kind of got you to make the switch from architecture to more kind of, because architecture obviously has its own elements within art and design and everything, but the switch to more of a, I guess you say, kind of creative arts type of deal?
For me, it's just, I just needed to change. I felt like what I wanted to do all along was make art. When the classes started to shift more to the professional degree program, where it was more so about, like hands-on, almost like being in a architecture firm, like nominal sizes of doors and like, looking up plumbing codes and all that other stuff. I was just like the design foundation courses were where I felt like fulfilled. And that was, stripping away actually building something. It was about learning to see, learning how to use your senses in order to experience a site, trying to shift someone's experience in a space. And by shifting light, by changing textures and all these other things. So it was more of an ambiguous creative kind of courses in a way, where you were more so going down a path of discovery. I just didn't know what to call it at the time of like going and becoming an artist. And I was just like, oh, this is, so when I got the, when they started that new media arts degree, I was like, oh, I gotta, this is the shift that I, need to make.
I mean, and so now, and I'm not trying to be shrinky about it, but just really a question. What
I'm prepared for this part. Yeah,
no, you're good. You're good. Trust me, it's not going to be weird. Yeah. But just like, what did your parents say? Because from what I know about African parents, they are all about the professions and, regiment and stuff.
I mean, there's like it's like funny. There's like a funny meme on, that was like floating around the web where it was just like, lawyer, doctor, engineer, or disgrace to your family or whatever. And it's just like, so yeah, I mean, when I was in, they just didn't really jive with it at all. They are coming at it from a perspective of wanting to find a stable job that has income, that has, security. But what's interesting and what's funny now is that like, seeing, especially in the time that we're in now with like this, pandemic, the idea of what is a secure job has really just, kind of been blown up, because like a lot of people who've had, from all sorts of, fields of work are like out of work right now. So, and what jobs are important. So, so no, they weren't down with it. Well, if I wasn't down with it, my mom was kind of just like, she's always been very creative, and she was just like, I support you. I just, I want you to, I didn't have the opportunity to do this, so I want you to be able to go chase it as far as you can go. So.
Okay. So you did the degree at Southern Poly.
Yes, I did.
And then from there, you did graduate studies in New York, correct?
Yeah, at SBA. Mm-hmm.
Okay, and so did you go immediately from undergrad? Did you take some time off, or?
Ooh, no. I did the architecture program was a 5-year program. So when I started undergrad, I was on a 5-year track. So even when I switched my major, still 5 years, and then into the 2 years of grad school afterwards. So I went straight through. Like, and after that, I was exhausted because I had taken, there was like no breaks. It was like, day one, you walk in kindergarten, and then you open your eyes and you get in a master's degree, and there's no breaks at all. Okay. And I think what also was like, when I found the name for the thing that I've kind of been chasing this entire time, which was like making art and being creative in that way, the fire was there, and I was just like, I'm not waiting.
I mean, but all right, so thinking about it in terms of vocation and study and everything, because what the program you described at Southern Poly was pretty wide. As far as y'all being exposed to everything. So I'm imagining in the master's program, you had to kind of narrow it down a little bit.
No, actually not. I got lucky again, like, which is crazy. Like this, I mean, it's kind of, when I look back on it, it's really a lot of these educational kind of opportunities that I've had have been open and have, helped and foster the way in which I think about making. My program that I ended up going into was also going through a transition. So they had a new chair, which when you're going through transitions, I mean, in those kind of institutions, people are coming in with different kind of ideas for where they want to take the program and all this other stuff. The chair of the department, like Mark Tribe, he came in and was like, I really want student feedback, because I'm coming in, I'm, starting new, I'm taking this program in a new direction, want student feedback. Also, SVA was a kind of interdisciplinary program. So a lot of graduate programs in art will have painting department, sculpture department, all of like they will have these kind of rigid things. And
Okay.
SVA, I mean, and one of the things that I liked about it is that I could have a quote unquote new media artist, whatever, in my program. I could have a sculptor, whatever, in my program, a painter, a performance artist, anything, just, all within the same crit. So for me, I felt that that was a really interesting way to get different perspectives, because getting a whole, I think, range of different ideas, I think only strengthens, the work and strength, because people are coming in with their own kind of, backgrounds, and being able to give you feedback in a way where you didn't, in a place that you didn't expect.
I mean, since you've left school, how has kind of that foundation continued to inform your practice?
Right after grad school, I had another kind of educational experience also at Skowhegan. I did a artist residency
Now, where is Skowhegan? What is Skowhegan?
in School of Painting and Sculpture. It's a residency, 9 weeks in up in Maine.
Oh,
It's
wow.
amazing. It's an amazing, just like, it's a once you only, yeah, it's there's some residencies where you can apply to go again. This one's like, one time, and it's an amazing kind of just wild crazy summer where you go up there and you live by a lake, you're in a cabin, and it's just nothing but woods and studios and just art, and you're just kind of in an artist community, and y'all are just, making a community together. It was definitely showed me the things that I care about, because it strips away all of the other kinds of, I guess, factors of the art world. Whether you're worried about a collector, you're worried about a I don't know, even like peers reviewing your work, whatever. Like, it's just, you're kind of just away, and it's a chance for you to just keep making mistakes, make it, throw it out, rework it. It's just like that kind of thing, which I feel like is really the kind of attitude you should really always have in the studio. But yeah, that's I think that helped a lot. And then after, I don't know, like life in New York, really just trying to, figure that out. And then also realizing that for me, work has been a companion. Being in my creative output has really been a companion for me throughout my life, in a way where it hasn't helped me understand what's going on around me. Like, I use it to really, helping me engage with the environment around me. It's like something that I've always, whether there's been like issues in the neighborhood, at the house, whatever, it's like I always find myself going back to that. Like, in times of trauma or real struggle in my life, when I'm really dealing with very hard things, I find that I'm working more. I find that, there's more fire to create. There's more, because I needed it, I should say, in a way, until I started going to therapy. So it's like, and then now I'm finding new uses for the art. That's also the kind of shift, I think, in my practice that has happened recently, is that after going to therapy, the place that it takes for me is a different spot.
I mean, it's interesting because artists who I've met, and as I, have started learning more, but for, creatives, artists, however you want to define it, I've found that the process of creating is less about a vocation, less about a paycheck, and just kind of who somebody is.
Yeah.
You said now you're realizing that for different parts of life, it can impact your practice and things. But when did you first realize kind of the connection between the two?
Between what to the specific?
Between the kind of you creating things and how you use it to kind of deal with life, or how it changes in response to what's going on around you.
I think it's like something in the back of my mind that I've known, but I think after, again, like after I started, therapy and all this other stuff, it's like kind of brought that to the forefront. Like, this device that you use is like also a coping mechanism for things. It's like you realize that you start to trace your, the habits of like, oh, this happens, and then you go and do this. And I think even when I look back on my projects, the project that I did right before my thesis in graduate school was called Mad Conqueror, PTSD of a Young Atlanta Nigga. That was like a big project that I did in undergrad. And then before that, I did another project where I kind of wrote down a lot of real just commentary on what people would say to me about the like Black identity growing up in the neighborhood, and you know, comments that stuck with me, and then I used my handwriting, turned it into a font, and then created these vinyl letters to place on the wall as an installation. So and yeah, it's just when I go back and look at the different projects, there's always a element of me trying to understand and piece together something that has happened.
I mean, as much or as little as you care about sharing, when did you start therapy and when did you get around to it?
So I started going, the first time I went was in undergrad. Around the time I switched from media arts to architecture. And I'm gonna leave that there. I started going, I went back again 2018.
What was that process like to even decide to go to therapy?
It was just that I was just going through like a really just a difficult time with just everything, just like, you know, the grind of making work. And me, I'm a person that's very purpose kind of driven. So for me, I was starting to question, like, what's the purpose of this thing that I'm doing, of me doing this art and then doing these jobs in the city and all this? Like, what is this? Like, what is my life right now, you know? And it was just like, you know, depression and also like anxiety and all that stuff. So I friends at the time were like, yo, you know, maybe you should, you know, kind of think about doing it. And when I always often like talk to like my friends about therapy because it helped me so much at the time, but then it was a process of me going back, because my first therapist, I like had a really great relationship, but she was like a temp, I guess, at the university. When I came back the next semester, she was gone. And the person that they kind of like were like, oh, you should go to this person, it wasn't working. So I hadn't gone back since that point. And then 2018, I started on this app called BetterHelp, and I went through, it was like on a free 7-day trial, whatever. I went through two therapists, and then I was about to like be like, all right, forget it, this ain't gonna work. And then the last one, literally on the last day of my free trial, I found my therapist who I'm still working with now.
You know, it's one of those things where just a couple of fronts. I mean, one, I think for anybody to decide to go to therapy is one thing. For another, I think being a man to go to therapy is another thing. I think being a Black man from is another. And as you put it, a young nigga from Atlanta going to therapy. That's a different thing. So,
yes.
Full transparency, you know, I told you I do adult and child psych, but during residency, I started going to therapy as well.
Okay.
And it's one thing to, you know, say, like, especially from my end, like, yeah, you know, go do the therapy thing, but it's another thing because when you sit in that chair, stuff is real different.
Yeah, I can't imagine how it is for y'all to like have I was like, who's the therapist of the therapist? Like,
I mean, and that's the thing, you know, it's no real alchemy to it or rocket science. You just kind of sit down and I'm certain you realize after a few sessions, you just get to a point where it's like, all right, I'm either going to get with this process or I'm not.
Right, exactly.
You know, and I'm good enough to have some homeboys who do go to therapy, and you know, we're able to talk about it and things like that. Yeah. You know, but a lot of people feel like it's automatic because of the feel I'm in. I'm like, no, like it can't.
No.
Yeah, like it's, you know, I mean, but on the other hand, I'm certain you've experienced it can be something that's very helpful.
No, yeah, of course. I mean, I tell anybody, listen, I'm like, yo, go. Like, it's can be transformative, and you know, there's a lot of healing that can come out of it. There's also a lot of like hard truths that can come out of it at times that you've been trying not to see, and then you're just like, now I gotta do something about it.
Well, no, it's like it's not necessarily I gotta do something about it, but it puts you in a space of being accountable where if you don't do
right,
that's the thing. You might be kind of ain't shit if you just not gonna do anything.
So right, that's the thing. It's like getting to that point where you're just like, okay, so now I know this thing, And like, okay, the process of going to therapy, I think, helped me to understand my um, what drove my practice, you know, where like the core of the things that I care about, and also shifting, which was also kind of scary for me because I was just like, oh, I've always made work from this place in me. And I'm like, if almost to the fact of like, if I'm too, how can I say this? It's almost like if I, will that place still be there, right? Like if I get, not if I get too healthy, but kind of just like if you because a lot of times people talk about creators pulling from like such great depths of pain or whatever to make like great work and all this other stuff, and you're just, and then there's like a fear like halfway through is like, yeah, I'm doing it, like the homework or the task that I'm getting, I'm like crushing it, even when the downtimes I'm like, you know, allowing myself to feel those emotions and then taking accountability, all these other things. And then I'm looking at my art practice and I'm just like, wait a minute, this place that I made work from before no longer serves me. So what do I do now? It's just like, so that was, I think, the scary part. But then stepping into that and pushing through to that, realizing now that I'm making better work than I've ever made. So it's like, yeah, that fear was there though.
That's huge. And I have a friend that's an author.
Yeah.
Not gonna say his name,
Mhm.
but he really plays up, just kind of writing from a place of pain and everything. And I haven't told him this directly, but I've told another person, our friend group, I'm like, I just wish such and such realized, like, you don't have to be broken to make good art.
Right. Exactly.
And I think a lot of folks get caught up in the narrative of it, and and it's romantic and it's sexy, but it's not sustainable. It's not.
No, 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 no. Mm-mm.
And another thing, I mean, so reading through your bio and everything, and this may be what I interpreted, so let me know if I'm wrong.
Okay.
But you're kind of self-proclaimed nerd anime, like you're into that, right?
Oh yeah.
And so this is a mainstream example. But did you see the X-Men reboot with Michael Fassbender, James McAvoy, everything else?
Yeah, yeah. Which specific movie?
I can't remember if it was First Class or the second one. It was one of the two.
Okay.
But basically, where Charles is telling them like, "Look, Eric, you basically all your power comes from this rage.
Oh yeah.
There's another way to do it." And then he like stables his mind, and he realizes he's super powerful or whatever.
Yeah.
Like I feel like people just don't get that.
No, because you're so used to, it's like when you're so used to this thing, you want to stay here. Being so used to the pain, it's almost like what's on the other side, because it's you rather deal with what you know rather than the kind of, unknown, right? Deal with, what is what else is out there, what could be. Petrified to take that step to the other side because this is your place of comfort. It's weird when that place of pain, you realize, it's just strange that like when you realize that place of pain becomes a comfort zone, and of being afraid to step out of that because this is what has gotten you to this point. It's been how you've overcome obstacles in the past. I forgot who said, I heard this somewhere before. It's like that mentality took you this far, but it can take you no further, right? It's like you got through this, whether it was like your upbringing, your household, neighborhood, whatever, all of that got you here, but it's not enough to take you.
Yeah, I mean, I think the thing is what people kind of confuse is there's things you do to survive, and then there are things you do to thrive.
Exactly.
And so, but people survive for so long that they just equate living with thriving when that's not necessarily the case. And another piece that at least I hear you saying, and I'm just going to name it, is not only is it about what has gotten you to this point and everything else, but there's a big identity piece there as well.
Yeah.
As far as being identified by your pain and ability to deal with it. I mean, and at least, as you said, kind of looking at race and identity in some of your work, I feel like that is definitely the case because the whole narrative of Black folks in this country is just drenched in suffering, enduring, and overcoming.
Yeah.
To the point where if you're not putting forward this ideal of those things, some people just straight up view you as a sellout almost.
Yeah, a sellout, or they don't perceive your voice as valid. That comes when your center point from validation exists everywhere else besides within you. So I think that for me, I mean, I've even had, I mean, obviously, like I've even had this in like, graduate school where because of some of the aesthetics that I choose to use, people will question the authenticity to. It's like, oh, it's not distressed enough for what you're talking about. It's not
Well, I
like
guess out of curiosity, who are those people that are questioning?
they're not black. Let's just throw that out there, right?
Okay, and that's it. I guess, but I wanted to ask. I didn't want to assume.
No. These are some white classmates who are like, oh, well, it should be more disheveled and distressed because it's like you're talking about so much pain, and I'm like, nah, this just like from a different perspective. And I think for me, in the types of aesthetics that I use and the types of that I've used in the past and also the things that I'm using now, I do them and I go towards them for the way that they like entice the viewer to engage with the subject matter. And and for me, because I also find those aesthetics interesting, not because like I'm trying to portray some kind of, I don't know, profile to an audience that isn't mine about what black pain is. It's just like I think there's space for us to talk about the intricacies of that pain in a different way. It doesn't have to be one note like, oh, overcoming suffering, overcoming, you know what I mean? I'm not out here making Selma. That's like, we're not doing that. But I think that there's a real place to talk about it in new and interesting ways. I like to talk about like, horror and black horror. There's a really interesting documentary on this app called Shudder, which is like an app. It's like Netflix, but just for horror movies. And like a documentary called Horror Noir. And it talks about the history of black bodies in horror movies. It goes through the history of talking from, I mean, way, way back to like, to Candyman and then to like Jordan Peele's newer stuff. And I think, that's it. Even his newer stuff, like the interesting point of like Get Out or Us is, yes, it's telling, there's stories of black pain in there, but it's telling it in a different way where you're getting a different perspective, right? It's not just like one note, like pain, overcome pain. It's like, what's the intricacy of these, wealthy doctors trying to, spoiler alert, trying to like body snatch black people, you know what I mean? That kind of thing.
So at least with this particular show, a lot of it did focus deliberately on pain, kind of darkness, things like that. And so can you tell me a little bit more about how this Black Bile company that, the BBC, what that was about?
Yeah. So what I wanted to do, I think part of that shifting for me, using fiction more in my work as a device to be able to engage with these subjects. And so for me, it's kind of a story within a story. So Black Bile Toys is a fictional toy company that was created by excommunicated doctors from the Thorn Institute for the Negro Insane. And they created this toy company because they saw that there was no toys that spoke to the pain that they were, the pain and the mutations and stuff that they were addressing in the Thorn Institute. So these doctors were like, oh, well, they looked around and saw that the other toy companies were making toys for either, fun or, for, kind of aspirational ideas that the kids would have, whether they want to be a policeman, a doctor, whatever, astronaut, Power Ranger, whatever. But there weren't toys or objects that were created in order to represent these other kinds of emotions. I was looking before into the idea of like melancholy and looking into medieval science, and they talked about black bile, and I thought that was like an interesting kind of point of reference. It was like black bile, and then I started like thinking about like the Venom symbiote and Spider-Man. And
that was what I got from some of the figures. I got that, and I got Toxic Avenger when I first saw him.
Oh, there you go. And then also, I mean, Spawn's also my, one of my favorite.
Really? Okay.
So,
okay.
So
a lot of people know Spawn was a popular black superhero.
Yes, he was. And so there's in that I was thinking about these kinds of objects of fun being distorted to represent this emotion. have touched on that technique before, and I did these series of 3 playhouses in at the Franconia Sculpture Park in Minnesota. And for me, I was thinking about the idea of playhouses as a child, like the idea of a playhouse being a place of where you could turn it into anything. You play in a playhouse and think of it as a rocket ship, a castle, whatever. So it's just like this place where kind of dreams are endless. But what happens when those dreams come face to face with reality? It's so then I distorted each of these houses in a way and did an installation in each of these houses to kind of show as that gesture. So in order of like shifting these objects of innocence, as I call them, as if they kind of grew up with you.
I mean, as you've kind of put it out there, how has the work been received? I know how I received it, but just in general.
I have had a really interesting response. For some reason, it's like people come up to me and are, I guess, moved to express their own journeys with like mental health or going to seek therapy or the own things that are. It's like really, it's not so much of a oh, this is like a really cool piece. I mean, I get those or all this other stuff. Oh, this looks really cool. It's more so just like yo, this is hitting me in a way where I want to tell you about this and this and that and that. And it's twofold. One, I'm just like, wow, like I didn't expect people that I know personally to also be kind of, dealing with their own kind of, internal battles. But then for them to be able to come out and like share that and feel like use the piece as almost like as a threshold to be able to talk to me about their, what they're going through as well. That's been, I think, the most unexpected and also rewarding response.
I mean, for you, do you think people connect more to the aesthetics or more to the story that comes with it as they learn more about you? Or how do you think those kind of interact?
I think that at times it's a combination, not to be like a cop-out answer, but like I think it's like a combination, I think, of all of the things. And I think that's what I think I try to do anyway, is to use all of these tools at my disposal to create something engaging for the viewer in order to, James Baldwin, said that, creators and artists are, it's like not in the business of solving problems, but viewing people with the morale to, solve them for themselves. So for me, if I can be a seed, plant a seed, like a little nugget for somebody to maybe think more intensely about their journey with mental health, or seek therapy, or talk to somebody, or open up, or feel like they're not alone, feel like they don't have to like suffer in silence, that type of thing, or even I don't know, use different outlets in order to help them with it, whether it's writing, dancing, whatever. That's great for me. Can you hear that?
Yeah.
Oh, it's 7:00, and in the city they clap for the first responders and stuff. So I don't. If you hear like a concert going on outside, it's because like they're screaming and honking horns and banging pots and pans out the window.
I got you. What part of the city do you stay in?
The Heights.
Oh, the Heights. Okay, cool. I stayed in Harlem for a couple of years.
What part of Harlem?
I don't know if it's mid Harlem, Central Harlem. Basically, the first year was 135th. The second year was like 127th on the west side.
On the west side. Okay.
Yeah. So spent a couple of years up there. That's actually where I did my child psych training. So did some time up in the Heights, and then would do the other part on kind of like the Upper East Side.
Wow.
So familiar with New York. My brother lives up there, and he told me like, basically during the day stuff is just empty. And he says just out to sea.
Depending on what part of the city you're in.
Very true.
Because uptown, and in certain places, I'm not dry snitching, but uptown up here, people are still on the block with the hookah. I'm just saying, it's just empty, but people still on the block passing the stuff with the hookah. I'm just like, yo, what do we do?
I would say like the one constant in Harlem is folks gonna be outside. Yeah. Like no matter what time of day.
They don't care what's going on.
Yeah.
And the crazy thing is that like it's like the same, like the corner boys is still on the block. They just have surgical mask on now. So I'm just like, this is surgical mask and gloves. I'm like, what?
Got it. So, I mean, so, you talked about making that switch from, or at least finding the avenue that you wanted to use to create. And I
Yeah.
mean, and especially the way that you describe things, I definitely think it's dope and appropriate that the way that you kind of came to it, there was a wide lens.
Mm-hmm.
Because like you said, you can use all these tools at your disposal to tell a story.
Yeah.
So as you see your work going on, is it telling the same story or is it telling different stories, or how does that kind of go?
I think my work is growing with me. What I'm into at the time, it's funny because we have a family activity right now with Latchkey, about where we're doing like, individual activities and like family activities. And one of them is a time capsule that I proposed. And I think for me, when I look back at my works, a lot of my favorite projects have acted as a time capsule for me in that moment. So I think, moving forward, the ideas that will come out will be the ones that have been, that will have been percolating in my mind at that time. It's like those, so that's that's just where I feel like it comes. It's very much so a organic process.
You mentioned that was in response to the time, but had you always kind of had those ideas about, with my work, I love to incorporate families and community and interactive piece?
I think it's funny. I've always been using my work as a way to communicate ideas. Being the first, like my mom has a lot of like brothers and sisters who are also here, but being the first kind of child born in America, and then all of my cousins being younger than me, like they were all babies. So I was constantly like over the summers, they would drop the kids off at my mom's house and I would watch them. So I was constantly making like arts and crafts, like activities for them and all this other stuff. So that kind of just came naturally. It's also something that helped me as a kid. I mean, I went to space camp a couple times. I'm really showing my nerd card here. I went to space camp. So yeah, and those activities where they would do activities to teach us about space and to teach us about, even, our planet and all these other things. So I always found those interesting. In grade school, I always found every time we would do a class project where we had to create something in order to reinforce a lesson or in order to do something, for whether it was for extra credit or they assigned it, I was always wanting to be like, I want to do that. The way in which I think and process is by making, so is by doing. So a lot of times the best way I know how to explain something is to do it through creating. You have a podcast? You're one of four in the podcast, right?
Oh, yes. So the name of the podcast is called The Charting Room.
Charting Room?
It's myself and three therapists just kind of sitting back and just talking about mental health. So we talk about some hot topics. We talk about some focused topics. It's all about kind of making sure that mental health is not something that's inaccessible to people or weird or spooky. And so, just trying to talk about it and just bring it to a number of conversations.
Right.
So it's a lot of fun. I mean, I think just inherently we're geared towards millennials, people of color, but it really is for everybody, depending on how many curse words we use in an episode.
Yeah, that's always.
But it's a good time. I encourage you to check it out, and always appreciate feedback.
Definitely. And I was interested because you said you're also a collector. So like how does your I guess your profession inform the kind of art, or does it inform the kind of art that you like?
So, I'm trying to think. I mean, I think at this point, my profession is kind of an extension of who I am. Okay. Thankfully, as of now, not the other way around.
Yeah, okay.
And so I just know for me, like my goals in collecting are just images that either reflect or magnify Black people. Like this piece back here, print by Tim Akamura. Tim Akamura is not a Black person, but a lot of his work features primarily women of color. And I mentioned it off camera, but the reason why I chose this to be in the background is because this is the first piece that I got from Latchkey Gallery. So thank y'all for that. But yeah, I mean, basically my collection is made up primarily of living Black artists and anything that I can find my reflection in, because, well, there are a couple of reasons. One, I want my space that I live in to be affirming for Black people.
Okay.
And so that's something that I'm very intentional about. And then the other part is just historically the narrative of this country, especially economically speaking, has been Black people create and white people own and take all the value. And so it's one thing to appreciate Black art. It's one thing to take the step from that's nice to how much is it to I think I might try and buy it.
Right.
And so that has also informed a lot of the decisions that I made and pieces that I go for. I got a group of friends, we all collect together. And I think when people use the term collector, it's like, oh, you just spent $100,000 on something. It's like, no, some stuff is 50, some stuff is 500, some, there's just a range. But I think if you get in early enough, things can appreciate. But if nothing else, and I think Swiss Beats talks about a lot, but just keeping stuff within the culture.
Yeah.
And not just the aesthetics of it and not just the, metaphorical value, but the literal economic value as well.
Yeah, most definitely. And then buying either from the artist or from institutions that are, that make it a point to treat the artist fairly is also a very, big thing as well,
Another thing I do is for most of the pieces that I get, since, right now I can afford emerging artists, is I end up reaching out to folks directly, or like once I hang it in my house, whether it's Instagram or otherwise, I'll try and send the person a picture of it so that way they can know where it landed, just make it more of a conversation.
That's great.
Yeah, and it's one of those things where I'm not that great yet at just buying stuff online in general. I've been doing it more, obviously, because of circumstances. But I like to get a chance to talk to the artist to understand a little bit more of the motivation behind it, just because I really want to, at least with visual art, it's just like finding the perfect lyrics for a song that fits your mood.
Yeah.
It's like, wow, for you to come up with this and then connect with me, I want that. Like, I don't think I'm at the point or will be at the point where, I go to somebody and I commission a piece, like, this is how I feel, please. Just like,
match the couch and pillows and
I'm just like, I go out there, I see what it's like. And I'm like, this really connects with me. I would like to have this as a permanent part of my life.
Yeah.
And go.
Because I always wonder how, like, what, like on the collector side, like what informs what, that pursuit in a way, like what informs what they choose. And, if that, changes over time, right? Like if like just based off of the circumstances of life, bigger plays, smaller plays, does that change what people buy? I know there's, some collectors are more interested in sculpture, some are more interested in flat works on paper. So it also, depends like medium wise as well. So yeah, this is interesting.
Yeah, I think I started whatever speaks to me. I think right now it probably is more 2D type of stuff. I don't have too many sculptures. I might see if I can get a quilt here or there. Yeah. But, the same way, you kind of said that you had that drive at first and then you were able to name it later.
Yeah.
I think the same thing with me, and at least the pieces I respond to, a lot of it is trying to put it into words. And then from there, after I'm able to put it into words, and it's like, okay, I think I want that one. Or I may even, just grab it before I can put it into words because it just sticks with me.
Yeah, and sometimes that's, I think sometimes that's also a very powerful notion when there is something that speaks to you and then you don't really have the vocabulary articulated just yet, but that it hits, right? I think that's a sign that whatever that connection is with the work is, hitting on all cylinders, really. It's just like, oh, there's something there. So, I think that's a great, compass, so to speak, to have in a way in terms of like collecting.
Yeah, and that's the thing. It's one of those things where even now, as I'm looking at my very young collection, it's kind of like I can see it being something that definitely changes over time, and realizing that not everything has to be uniform or fit a theme. And I think because I view myself as a collector, instead of somebody who just buys art or decorates, my approach is different in that I don't have to figure out exactly where this piece is going to go. It doesn't have to fit a color scheme for a room or anything like that. It's more, I want to have it in my collection. And then from there, I can figure out later on, do I want to display it? Do I not want to display it? Do I just want to look at it privately? And that type of stuff.
Oh, interesting. So do you also often talk about art in your podcast as well?
Not as much on the podcast, just because. So I will bring up art when it's natural and appropriate. But, if it's not a part of the conversation, I feel like it's just basically pretentious and douchey to all of a sudden just drop, this reminds me of
exactly.
TOURÉ piece from 2014.
Right.
Yeah. But yeah, so but the thing is, off the podcast or whatever else, if you show a hint of interest in art, or actually even if you don't, and I just happen to be on a tear about it, I will talk anybody's ear off about it because it's just so exciting.
Yeah.
So exciting.
Right. I mean, that makes sense. That definitely makes sense. It's just like once that fire for art, is ignited, it's just like you just go. Like you just go. Like I definitely, if I get into a bag, start like meeting somebody and I start talking about art, it's like it just goes on, it's just
I
wild.
mean, and I think, as we talked about it earlier, just concepts of identity and everything else.
Yeah.
There's a lot that you can do to affirm your identity.
Yeah.
A lot of that is very interpersonal. It's something like, all right, me as this, but if somebody walks into your house, it's kind of like, a book collection or a DVD collection or a record collection, whatever else.
Yeah.
When you see what's going on, it's basically a physical kind of portfolio of aspects of your personality and who you are. And so I think just having that, on the walls in the place that I live,
Yeah.
and share that with people and discuss it and everything else, it's just a very dope interaction. It's almost like an icebreaker that's not annoying,
Right. I can see that.
Yeah.
I can see that. Because I guess in some instances, like if somebody's like walking into a studio and then it's like the work is all up and then they see like my work and then it's kind of like, oh, these are the things you care about. Because a lot of times if you get a studio visit, people will, first thing they may do is to like go to your bookshelf in the studio to go see what's informing this. Or they go look at if you got, I don't know, like if you got back in the day with the CDs or whatever, records, or if you got something in there, it's just to like go everywhere else. Because when I do studio visits with other artists, like that's one thing that I do is I look at everything else besides what they're showing me first. It's like I'm looking at all of this other stuff because I'm trying to get clues as to what informs this. Like it's like, what are you listening to at 3 a.m. that's informing this painting or this sculpture or whatever you're doing.
Yeah.
And, yeah.
And that's the thing, like there are just so many interactions and so much information that comes at us, just in life.
Mm-hmm.
I think it's always interesting to be able to talk to somebody about what they choose to hold on to.
Right.
And kind of like, why is that a thing? What spoke to you? And basically what makes this valuable enough for you to preserve?
Right.
And so I think that is a part of, my thing when it comes to collecting, like this was valuable, I want to preserve it, but I also want to display it. So either you can benefit from the value, see it, or, just kind of just share it in that way.
Yeah. Okay.
I definitely appreciate your time.
Thank you.
Your transparency. Yeah. Just being,